Good morning, everyone. This is Nancy Hughes. I am the Executive Director of the California Urban Forest Council, and I'm so remarkably excited to welcome Dr. Ming Kuo and have her spend the next impactful hour and a half with us. As the Executive Director of the California Urban Forest Council, I'm excited to welcome you too. We have attendees from around the globe and across the US, so this is really a special moment for us in this messaging. Our organization works across California, focused on education, advocacy, and large-scale regional tree plantings, mainly working with under-resourced communities while addressing environmental issues and bringing benefits. We have 7 regional councils across the state that you can get involved with. Please visit our website to learn more. And big thanks to our sponsors, the U.S. Forest Service and CAL FIRE, and our partner, the Bay Area Urban Forest Ecosystem Council, for this opportunity. Dr. Kuo is an internationally recognized scientist whose research focuses on how green space supports healthy human functioning in both individuals and communities. Her lab, the Landscape and Human Health Lab at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, focuses on the connection between natural features, trees, grass, flowers, and green space, and outcomes related to healthy human functioning, such as crime and violence, strength of community, well-being and coping, exercise and vitality, and attention, executive functions, self-control, and learning. Many of you in our industry are familiar with her work, which has given us the evidence we need to educate decision makers and the public, demonstrating the value of urban forestry and green spaces and promoting investments towards these outcomes. Please take the time to explore Dr. Kuo's bio in more detail, which shows her contributions and recognition globally and can be found on our website. A couple of things before we start. We are taking all questions through the link catree.us/ask, and you can see it at the bottom of this agenda slide right here. And it's also captured in the chat box. So if you do have questions as we move through the agenda, please send them to us there, and we will manage those and get them to Dr. Kuo. When the presentation is over, we will be sending out a brief survey that will allow you to connect afterward with those of you with similar interests. So please, if interested, respond to that opportunity. Also, ISA CEUs will be available through the survey as well. Okay, please welcome Dr. Ming Kuo, speaking on Trees Are Essential, Growing Human Health and Equity, and thanks for being here today. So, David?
Yep, good to go.
We're good to go?
Yes.
Thank you.
So good morning, or I guess it's noon here. It's noon in my world. Good morning to all of you, and thank you for showing up. And I'm hoping that this will be an interesting and not deadly Zoom hour and a half. So today I'm speaking on 3 topics actually, but we're gonna highlight the first one, which is healthcare expenditures. And I am not sure how to get the picture of myself to go away. Okay, so can everyone see the Trees Are Essential slide, and it's not blocked by anything else?
Yeah, I mean, your screen is good to go and it's clear.
Awesome, great. All right. So thank you, Nancy, for having me. I'm really excited to be here because I think these are spectacular findings, and it's just really it's great to be able to share them with actual California urban forest folks as well as others who are interested. So our first topic today is return on investment, trees and healthcare expenditures. And this is brought to you by lots of people. My co-PIs on the project are Matt Browning and Stephen Van Den Eden. And then we had a number of other investigators who played various crucial roles, including a lot of the data analysis and data analytic support. We received funding from the USDA National Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council, affectionately known as NUCFAC. My university, Kaiser Permanente, and our very own host, the California Urban and Forestry Council, supported this. And I want to say, I just want to say, you know, I assume you all, or some of you contribute dues to the California Urban Forestry Council. And this seems to me like a perfect example of what that's for. We could not have done this project without credible partners, and California Urban Forestry Council was a really crucial part of that. And CAUFC will also be helping us get the word out, including this talk. So your membership is doing good things, or at least I hope you'll think so. Okay, so I'm just going to start very briefly with why study healthcare expenditures. So by health, well, let me first say what are healthcare expenditures? So healthcare expenditures are basically what we spend on healthcare as opposed to anything else we might spend it on. And there are a number of ways it's interesting to study the relationship between trees and healthcare expenditures. The first is this is kind of a global way of testing the greenness health relationship. Healthcare expenditures, as you can imagine, are going to reflect your lack of health, right? So the more ways in which your health is not quite right, the more you're going to spend on fixing it. So testing the healthcare expenditures, the effect on healthcare expenditures helps us look at health in a new way. But more, or just as important, healthcare expenditures are themselves worthy of studying. The US's healthcare expenditures are astronomical and rising. We spend roughly twice as much on healthcare, and we get as other developed nations, and we don't do any better in terms of our outcomes. So we're just overpaying, basically, is what's going on. At the individual level, there's kind of a emblematic statistic here. 40% of cancer patients, they go through their entire life savings within 2 years of diagnosis, and within 4 years of diagnosis, 38% are financially insolvent. And then another reason to study, so healthcare expenditures are a problem for the US as a whole and for individuals. And another reason to study the relationship between trees and healthcare expenditures is there's kind of a David and Goliath situation where on a per capita basis, I just have the numbers for parts, but on a per capita basis, we see communities spending on the order of $80 per capita. You know, it's higher and lower in different places, but that's kind of the rough scale of expenditures at the per capita level for trees or parks in this specific case. And on the other hand, what we spend per individual on health is on the order of $10,000 or $11,000 in 2018, and I imagine it's quite a bit higher now. So if you compare something on the order of $100 with something on the order of $10,000, then what you can see is if trees have any effect on health whatsoever, even a 1% change in healthcare expenditures would completely swamp the cost of even doubling your tree care tree investment, right? So if I'm going to spend, I'm currently spending $100 per capita. Let's say I go to 200. If I save even 1% of $11,000 per capita, then I'm way ahead. So there's a really strong return on investment argument here to be made, or at least to explore. All right. I'm going to really blow through this. Why is a green healthcare expenditure link plausible? And this is probably fairly obvious to most of you, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time. More trees has been tied to both correlationally and experimentally better health, and obviously better health might affect healthcare expenditures. Let's take just a look at each of those links. So if we look just at the relationship between health and healthcare expenditures, it's probably no surprise to you that it turns out that health is a major factor in healthcare expenditures. All right, but let's take a look at the trees and health relationship. So in this area, you may not be aware of it, but there's actually a tremendous amount of evidence tying trees to better health, and it's all of it is controlling for or taking into account people's socioeconomic status. So it's not just that rich people live near trees or have more access to trees or have better parks, and then they're also healthier. It's that when we compare people who have the same amount of money and one has more trees or more access to trees and the other doesn't, then the person who has more access to trees and makes the same amount of money has, on average, substantially better health. So let me just illustrate that a little bit. Here's a diagram that shows the relationship between greenness on the one hand, on the left, and in the green box, and long-term health outcomes on the right. I'm not gonna let you look at this for very long, but I will provide links to all the figures for those who want it. Okay. But at any rate, what you can see on the right is there are a huge number of health outcomes tied to greenness, including such important items as cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, diabetes, and then I should mention that allergies actually have a very mixed relationship, both positive and negative, to nature. So nature seems to help us both avoid allergies, but it also can exacerbate them. And then in between the green and the red boxes on the left and right, we actually know a fair amount, more than you might have guessed, on what are the active ingredients in nature that lead to short-term and long-term health outcomes, and what are the specific short-term changes within the body or within our behaviors or our conditions that that may mediate or that may explain how the active ingredients have impacts on long-term health outcomes. All right, so that was kind of fast, but I hope that made sense. All right, and then let's go on to our to the larger question of the day: how do trees relate to healthcare expenditures? And I should mention that there's already been a little bit of work in this area, and it's all looking promising to the extent that people have done any work on it. So we did this study. I'm working with the University of I'm at the University of Illinois, and Matt Browning was at the time, and then we also worked with Kaiser Permanente Northern California sorry, I don't know how that happened, to look at the relationship between greenness or trees and healthcare expenditures. We used two measures: NDVI, which is based on satellite imagery and is at the 30-meter resolution, and FRAP, which I'm sure my California folks are familiar with. That's a 1-meter resolution description of the percentage of tree cover in any given area. We look at greenness in 3 buffers. In other words, if I'm looking at Byung-suk's healthcare records, I'm going to draw a 250-meter radius around Byung-suk's home address, a 500-meter radius around that address, and a 1-kilometer radius around that address. And I'm going to see how green it is within those 3 circles, and I'm going to also see what percentage of those circles is covered by tree canopy. Just to give you an idea of what 250 meters is like, that's roughly an average street block. So if you draw, the first circle is one street block around your home. On the other side, we're looking at healthcare expenditures for, actually it's over 5.1, almost 5.2 million Kaiser Permanente members. We have 5 years of electronic medical records for those folks. And we do this for the Kaiser Permanente Northern California membership, including people in 24 different counties, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, Sacramento metropolitan areas, and a good chunk of the North Central Valley. So this covers, our study covers a great deal of Northern California, very varied landscapes and community sizes from rural to urban, exurban, suburban, mountainous, coastal, agricultural plain, you know, you name it, it's in there. So we're going to answer 5 questions. Here's the first one, the kind of most obvious. Just, are healthcare costs lower in neighborhoods with more trees? And we've got, as I said, 2 greenness measures and 3 buffer sizes. I'll give you the answers for each greenness measure and each buffer size. You can see the sort of this 3 cells under NDVI and 3 cells under tree canopy, and maybe you can make a guess before I tell you. Do you think greenness or tree canopy is going to predict or not predict healthcare costs? And do you think the smaller radius or the larger radius might show the effect, but not the other? Place your bets. All right, now I'll show you the answer. Oop. Wait, how come? Oh no, I'm sorry, I don't know why. Okay, the answer is yes in all 6 cells, whether we use NDVI or tree canopy, and whether we use a smaller buffer or a larger buffer, we see the same thing. The greener the neighborhood or the greener your near home surrounding, the lower your healthcare costs. And frankly, if I tell you that, you should probably not be surprised, and you should be feeling somewhat skeptical. What is this person trying to do? They're obviously trying to pull a fast one. I know that rich people have greener areas, and that they have fewer health issues, and therefore they're generally going to have lower healthcare costs. So you're just telling me that rich people have trees and better health. But no, that's not the case. So the next question is, are healthcare costs lower after we take other factors into account? So if we take the person's age or their sex or their race or ethnicity into account, if we take their neighborhood deprivation, their education, their household income, the density of housing around them, the population density around them, and then the air pollution, air quality around them, do we still see this relationship between greenness and healthcare expenditures? Yes. Yes, indeed. All right, that's the second question. So what that tells us is when we compare people who are the same on all these dimensions, we still see that their healthcare costs are lower if they are in greener areas. Next question. How much lower? What are the percentage savings? On the right, you'll see a chart here. And what we're going to do is compare the healthcare expenditures for the highest greenness decile of the population versus the people in the lowest decile. So to put that another way, if I have 100 people, then I'm going to look at the 10 people who live in the least green settings, find out what their healthcare costs are, and then I'm going to take the 10 who live in the greenest settings, the 10 out of the 100 who live in the greenest settings, and I'm going to look at their expenditures, and I'm going to see what the ratio of the expenditures for the lowest versus the highest is. And the question is, what's the percentage savings? And I'm going to remind you here, we just talked about how even a 1% savings in healthcare costs would completely swamp the the cost of doubling our tree expenditures. So I'm going to give you a moment now to decide what percentage savings you think we might see. And remember, this is savings after taking into account income, education, occupation, etc. All of those socioeconomic status factors. So how much do you think the greenest and least green folks are going to be, what's this percentage savings when you compare them, even taking all of those other factors into account? All right, well, let's see the results. Surprisingly, that chart actually is the results. There's a 14% savings or difference in what the lowest are paying versus the highest. Sorry. If you take what the highest are, the people in the greenest areas, no. If you take what the people in the least green areas are paying in healthcare costs, then the people in the highest green areas are paying 14% less. So if we take just the people in our study, that's $165 million in savings. And that's not including all the people who are not in Kaiser Permanente, who live right around them. And we have no reason to expect that Kaiser Permanente folks are going to have a different relationship between greenness and healthcare expenditures than their next door neighbors, right? And we know the Kaiser Permanente folks correspond to roughly 20 to 30% of the people in their communities. And so you can see that the potential savings associated with green cover or tree cover are just staggering. All right. Our fourth question is, what is the shape of what we'll call the dose response curve? So as I increase greenness for each decile of the population, so my 10 people who live in the least green area, if I compare them to the 10 people who live in the next greenest areas versus the next, that's what we see across the bottom. And then on the y-axis at the right, we see how much they probably spend in annual healthcare costs. So this is per individual. And the line is drawn at the number of dollars that the average person in the least green area spends. That blue line that goes across the top, around a little bit above $4,500 a year. So now I'm going to try to explain what the I don't have a pointer. As an instructor, I feel suddenly hamstrung. So let me show you what a couple possible curves would look like. The first is just a linear decrease. Let's say the least green people spend what they do on annual healthcare costs, and then the people in the most green category spend less, which I already told you, that's true. Let's say it's a linear shape, so that as you increase greenness, you get a steady decrease in healthcare costs. So that would be a linear function. This shows what we'd call a ceiling. In other words, as you get to the median level of greenness, you no longer see any additional benefit of added greenness. So in this graph, you say there's a benefit to adding each bit of greenness until you get to about the midpoint, and then after that, you don't get any additional benefit. Another possibility would be this. Maybe all the way through the middle of the midpoint of the population, you see the same healthcare costs, no matter how much greenness there is. And it's only after you've reached a certain threshold of greenness that additional greenness seems to relate to lower healthcare costs. All right. Now, what I'd like you to do is take a moment and decide what you think might be the case. Do you think there's a linear relationship? Do you think You need a certain amount of greenness before you're going to see an effect, or do you see, or does greenness not matter after you get to a certain point? I hope you've placed your bets. Here are the actual data. And roughly, I think what you can see is there seems to be a threshold. That is, until you get to roughly the median level of greenness, you're not seeing much of a relationship between, well, really, no relationship between greenness and healthcare costs. But beyond the median point, you see that every additional increment of green, well, maybe not every, but generally speaking, the more greenness after that, the better you're doing on healthcare savings. All right, and finally, our last question for this section of the talk. Do trees drive healthcare expenditures via their impacts on health? I'm really including this more for my for my data nerds. Hello, data nerds. This is for you. The question here is, when we run a mediation analysis, do we see evidence that the way that trees relates to healthcare expenditures is via health? We operationalized health in 3 ways here: BMI, body mass index, which is a measure of obesity and weight, smoking, and comorbidities, which is basically a kind of index of how many health problems you have and how serious they are. And it turns out that when you take the health of a person into account, it seems our mediation tests seem to show that the more trees you have, the better health you have, and because of that improvement in health, let me let me be a little careful here. The story we're checking is, do trees improve health and thereby improve healthcare expenditures? And the analyses we do are completely consistent with that story. That said, I have to be, I can't mislead you. It is also possible to get that same pattern in the analyses for other causal relationships. But my point is just the analyses could have disproven the trees to healthcare expenditures chain of events, and they did not. All right, so those are our five main findings. I want to take a moment to just talk about why this matters. Well, it matters first and foremost. It matters because health matters. So to the extent that people are experiencing fewer or less severe health issues in areas where they have more trees, and that this cannot be explained by the fact that they're wealthier or have more education or any of the other factors we took into account. This throws another kind of big item on the pile of evidence suggesting that trees improve health. And that's important, as I said, because not only because health is important, but because trees are cheap. Trees are so much cheaper than health, in the same way that public health interventions in the past, if you provide sanitation and clean water for people, that's just vastly less expensive than taking care of the health issues when you don't provide that kind of basic infrastructure. So I think that these findings really add to our sense that trees are part of the essential infrastructure of any kind of living situation. If we feel that people all deserve clean water and sewage help and paved streets, then trees really ought to be in that same list. And then I guess the other 2 points I want to make here are, first, healthcare expenditures are a pressing concern for the nation, for cities, and for individuals. And so if by making tiny investments in trees, we can have substantial effects on how much we have to spend on, you know, imagine if I told you you're going to have 14% more of your income to spend on other things than health. Would that make a difference to you? Would that make a difference to our country or to your community? I'm guessing it probably would. And then my last point I wanted to make, which is a little bit surprising, is that this is actually quite relevant to COVID. In that many of the ways in which trees affect health are via the immune system, or they appear to be through the immune system. And guess what the immune system's job is? Among other things, it protects us from viruses. So we actually have a lot of reasons to expect that tree cover or living in greener areas is contributing to the kind of huge differences, the huge neighborhood differences we're seeing in the incidence of COVID and the severity of COVID. So as we have new healthcare concerns and new things to spend healthcare expenditures on, trees have a strong likelihood of helping with those. All right, I'm gonna close this talk now and take your questions. I hope you're still with me.
Yeah, Ming, so we got a few questions, 3, and I'll start with the first one. It's a bit more lengthy, so just stand by. Our city council would like to amend our municipal code to require tree planting on all new commercial and residential developments. As an architect in urban design studio, I would also like to recommend taking it further and encourage biodiversity and species habitat planting areas. I'm wondering if you have any resources or suggestions to support rewriting the code to require trees and biodiversity in urban development.
That's a great question. So can we move beyond just trees and general greenness to actual biodiversity? There are hints, or there are a lot of hints that biodiversity might matter. I would have to say that as a scientist, I don't yet find them absolutely compelling in that so for example, one of the studies looks at how restorative people find it if they are doing ecological restoration. And if you are doing ecological restoration in a more biodiverse area, you also report sort of getting more restored from the experience. But that's confounded with people's knowledge. So people who do ecological restoration, they're generally quite aware of how degraded the landscape is. And so we don't know yet. So for instance, with that study, we don't know yet, is it true for everyone, or would we get the same findings for people who have no idea whether an area is biodegraded or not. On the positive side, though, when we look at the different kinds of mediators or the active ingredients, I think there is a real plausible argument for why more biodiverse areas lead to better human health outcomes. The greener or the more biodiverse an area is in terms of what they call macro diversity, the more micro diversity you get. More different microbes in the soil and air accompany more diversity in the plants and animals in that place. And the more diverse the microbial environment, the more diverse. What we've seen is that if you basically, I'm gonna be very approximate here, but if you were to kind of rub dirt on somebody and you rub dirt that was very microbially diverse, you would see more and better microbial diversity in the gut and that is important for actually all kinds of things, mood, immune functioning, and other things. So there is definitely a kind of chain of evidence that suggests that generally more biodiverse areas are going to be better for human health than less biodiverse ones.
Okay, and then we have 3 more questions. Regarding living in green space areas and the healthcare cost comparison being lower in greener neighborhoods, how does this reflect for people living in desert communities where there is open air and less urban density, but maybe not as much greenness?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, let me give you a couple answers. First and foremost, we don't know. Okay, so we really don't know for sure. But I would say that to the extent that desert areas evoke the same kind of psychological states as, say, forest or mountainous areas, then you would expect some of the same health outcomes. So I guess the question is, when you go into the desert, do you feel that same sense of calm, the sense of where your ears come down from near your shoulders, and you have that kind of feeling? If you have that, then the chances are you're getting the same kinds of immune benefits that a greener area would give you in terms of the relaxation components. So the more relaxed you are, the more your body is willing to sort of put resources into long-term investments like immune functioning. And that's one of the main ways in which greenness seems to affect health.
Okay, and then yeah, you have them put up right there as well. The next question is, what's the y-axis? Is it the average cost per year per person?
The y-axis on, yes, that was on the chart with the dots and the sort of slope going down. Yes, that was average cost per year per person.
Okay, and the last question for this section, what do the different levels of tree canopy look like, say 50%, 80, or 100 in Northern California?
Those, I was showing NDVI, and also I was showing greenness deciles. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy I can show you of the different what those correspond to in Northern California, but I will ask my co-authors to provide that, and I'll definitely put that up in the post talk handout.
Okay, thank you.
Right?
All right, sounds good. Yep.
No other questions?
No, that was it for this section. All the rest to mini talk to. Okay,
well, you are a quiet bunch. Well, I want some interaction. Can you tell me what anyone want to share their reactions to these findings? I guess I'm feeling like, wow, these are huge, and I think they have the potential to really add an important new tool in your toolbox for arguing for urban forests. Any thoughts? Yes? No? You don't think so?
I'll monitor that in the chat and the questions tabs, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, that makes sense in the chat. How do I see what's in the chat? Oh, there we go.
Ming, this is Nancy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think for a lot of us who do this work every day in the trenches, how to take this information and translate it so we can utilize it to share with the decision makers who determine what the budgets are, et cetera. And anyway, I think we can work on that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are better at that than I am. I will say, a few decades ago, my lab created a bunch of one-page front and back flyers that sort of summarized each of some of our main findings, our lab's main findings. So the crime findings and the children's play and etc. And we handed those out, and they went out like hotcakes. I think we did a huge printing, and then we sold out of those or ran out of those, and then did another printing, and we actually did 3 printing before we decided they were just too old to be to continue pressing on people. And I think those had a real impact. Those flyers ended up being used at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and a lot of the urban forestry resolution in support of urban forestry items, you know, the structure of a resolution is whereas blah blah blah, we resolve, or be it resolved that blah blah blah, and the whereases, or 85% of them were items taken straight out of our flyer. So I think that if we put this information into kind of flyer, easy, short, visually yummy little tidbits that we can hand out, that has the potential of having the same kind of impact. No questions in the chat?
Yeah, a few more are coming in. The first one, are healthcare providers and insurance companies interested in lowering costs?
Oh, yes. I mean, the less they have to pay out, the happier they are. So, oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So yeah, I would think so. In fact, I can give you kind of at least some potential proof of that. There's a river corridor, I don't remember where, but it's somewhere in the US, where an insurance company partnered with the local government and maybe parks folks to create a river walk that has, you know, oh, you've traveled half a mile and that's good for you in these and such ways. And the whole idea was to make it kind of both a tourist attraction, which would be good for the local economy, but also because encouraging physical activity means that people are healthier. If they are healthier, then they have lower healthcare utilization and lower healthcare costs, which is all good for insurance companies. You know, ideally, health insurance companies would make the most money if we just kept spending money on insurance premiums and we never got sick, because then they would just keep all that money, right? So yes.
All right, we have another question. We also need support and investment in 2 areas other than tree planting in support of the outcomes detailed in your research, long-term maintenance for public and private trees, and the reconfiguration of our public right-of-ways to accommodate more large trees. You mentioned that more trees resulted in positive outcomes. Did you mean more tree canopy or actual more distinct trees?
Yeah, it's canopy. Our measure is of canopy. So, and in fact, there's some evidence, unfortunately, I don't remember exactly what it is, but I do remember there's evidence that has compared older and more mature trees, and there's a whole variety of more benefits for bigger, more mature trees than for just little spindly things. So we haven't looked at, and I don't think we can in our data, we haven't looked at the size of the trees in this study. I hope that answers your question.
All right, we have another question here. Because of the importance of biodiversity that trees support in cities, do you have any thoughts on systematic pesticides and fungicides that nurseries pre-treat their stock before sale to cities and to landscape professionals? And you know, if so, would you like more information on this?
I not, well, that's kind of so far out of my bailiwick that I'm glad to be educated, but I probably wouldn't be able to do much with it. But I think that's a nice point to be made.
And then a lot of people agreeing with the research outcomes, that they make a lot of sense, and are asking for some sort of summarized version of this, as Nancy was mentioning, for policymakers, decision makers.
Okay, great. Well, that's what Nancy and Deb and I are going to be working exactly on that. We wanted to get the information out to you all folks first, but that's definitely step 2. That's great to hear. Thank you. All right. Well, if we're done with that component of the talk, then I would like to, gosh, we are, well, you know what, let's do the equity, talk, and then we'll see if there's time for the academic achievement one. All right. And the equity talk I'm actually going to do as a kind of storytelling. I think I personally feel that I can only stand looking at slides for about this amount of time. So I hope you'll be okay with it, but I'm going to do this next part by just talking to you as a person. And I have 3 main things to say about equity. First, the levels of inequity in terms of access to greenness or trees or parks, kind of you name the specific measure of nature, distance to parks, quality of parks, safety of parks, street trees, you name it, and we have staggering levels of inequity. It's not perfect. It's not perfect in that occasionally you'll get older parts of cities where maybe there's actually a fairly high number of African Americans who live in, really beautiful, mature, tree-lined streets. So there are the exceptions, but by and large, you can pretty much, you can definitely map the tree cover of a community and then overlay the measures of disadvantage or poverty or any of the kinds of outcomes that are associated with poverty, and they look like the same map, right? Or no, sorry, they look like the inverse. So wherever there are trees, the blank spots in the tree cover map are the places where you find high crime, teen pregnancy, people not graduating high school, unemployment, and you sort of you name the outcome. You name the bad outcome, and it's where there are no trees. And previously we thought that was just because, those neighborhoods have fewer goodies. And so it wasn't that the trees were contributing to these terrible social outcomes. But over the last few decades, there's been more and more evidence that, in fact, greenness changes people. It changes people in ways that make them get along with other people better, have more self-control, be able to concentrate better. We're cognitively stronger if we have access to nature. And so there are all these changes in how the sort of human animal is functioning that are tied to not having access to nature. And so we're starting to understand that, the fact that these maps are so different, or these maps, the map for greenness and the map for poverty are inverses, is not just because certain areas can't afford them, but that the causal relationship goes in both directions. So as bizarre as it may sound, a lack of equity in tree cover, which you might think of as probably the last aspect of equity to address, might actually be a really important one to address. I'm finding myself, I really wish I could see your faces because I don't know if I'm being clear or not. But so I'm just gonna plow on.
Ming, just stop you 1 second. Is your screen paused, or are you still on the Q&A document?
I'm on the, I'm looking at myself.
Oh, okay. All right, just to make sure. Go ahead.
If that's okay. So is there, we can go back to a better screen, I guess. No, we can't. I don't know how. Okay, so if you guys don't mind, I'll just go in here. Oh, these are questions that should go up here. Okay, so we're now here in trees and equity, and please do enter any questions you have there as I'm speaking. So so the idea is that equity in tree cover might seem like the last thing we should worry about. Shouldn't we worry about making sure that there are jobs for folks in low-income neighborhoods? And that's absolutely true, but I would contend that in fact trees are an area where we have the chance to make big changes in addressing equity or lack of equity, and that they may actually, if you think of trees as vitamin G or vitamin N, G for green or N for nature, when people have access to green cover, to natural areas or natural elements, they are themselves more capable of taking care of themselves. They're better neighbors. They are better, more functional human beings. They're healthier, and they are therefore less needy in other ways. So it's just as if you were giving people vitamin C, and then you didn't have to deal with the sequela of people having vitamin C deficiencies. So in the same way that public health works better than medicine, focusing on inequities in green cover or access to nature is actually a really good potential return on investment. The second point I want to make is that this is kind of a growth opportunity for urban forestry. If you look at most communities, that's where, you know, the low income, underserved neighborhoods are the ones that don't have trees or don't have parks or don't have safe parks. And so if you want to be able to make a difference, in fact, focusing on those populations and neighborhoods and areas is the best opportunity. And I would argue that right now, even though cities and municipalities are having tremendous difficulties with budgets, I would argue you should continue to fight for that dollar, because it's a public health dollar. It's a dollar that can deliver so much bigger returns than other dollars that we spend. And because right now, I think mayors and the population is just more aware of the importance of addressing inequities. And so I think that this is not a good time for urban forest folks or advocates to just suddenly, oh, well, you know, our favorite cause is not as important as the other needs that are out there. I would say, I would disagree with that. I think it's, I could see why people would think that, but I think the science disagrees with you. So I would advocate that you continue advocating for urban forests. So that's my second point. And then my third point is, and I don't know if this is true for California, but I know that in other parts of the US, we have had well-meaning public works departments or private or nonprofits who have, in a very well-meaning, well-intended way, gone into low-income neighborhoods and tried to make a change and have had various bad things happen. And so I would like to sort of flag the possibility of bad things happen. Battery level is 13%. Yeah, I was noticing that, and I okay. If you'll excuse me a moment. Let me try replugging this in. Am I plugged in? No. Where are we? There we go. Okay. Thank you for letting me know about the battery. It would have been terrible if I just abandoned you suddenly for no apparent reason. So my last point with respect to equity is that there are some serious pitfalls in addressing inequities in green cover. And actually, I can tie this into George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. As you've seen, Black Americans and persons of color have a very different experience of our country than many whites and even many Asians. And we can't assume if we go into these communities that we will be trusted. So I'm actually, I have no idea what I was trying to say to you when the connection disappeared. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to answer your questions about equity in the document. So the first question is, do you know of or may link us to research comparing health interventions and equity interventions? Comparing health interventions and equity interventions. Increase urban forests as one of those interventions versus solely increasing employment and education to help with equity. No, I don't know of cases. I guess what I'm saying is that now that mayors and city councils are more sensitive to and that there's a kind of groundswell of interest in making the US more equitable, I think that framing your efforts in urban forestry in terms of equity is actually a powerful argument. Below that, since private tree planting is considered the easiest place to find tree vacancies, but many poor households feel they cannot afford to care for or even purchase large species. I'd love to be able to show this virtue to healthcare companies, home insurance, as they often thwart planting or remove trees unnecessarily. How many public health agencies are stepping into the public policy issue? None that I'm aware of at this time, but this is, I mean, giving this talk is part of our effort, doing this research and giving this talk is part of our effort to make inroads into the public health realm. I really do think that the two biggest public health initiatives that need to happen in the next X amount of time are to address homelessness in the US and greening for low-income neighborhoods. I've been made a presenter now, so I'm just gonna show you my Google Chrome, so we're all looking at the same thing. I have a question up here. I'll let it complete before I answer it. I'm looking at this one. I find opposition to tree planting with reasons. Okay, so a bunch of reasons. I would say it's important to take the reasons people give with a grain of salt. Not that they're lying, but that if you have trust between the person, the neighborhood that you're trying to serve, and your organization, then you would get different answers than if you don't have trust. And it's not because people are lying, again, it's just because they're not going to say, well, I don't trust you. They're going to say, well, there's this and that and the other thing, because it occurs to them. So I don't, it's useful not to, I mean, you should absolutely address these things because they are reasons, but they're not the underlying reason, or they're not necessarily the underlying reason. Anyway, so the advice I have on this score is, one, do not just do greening for people without talking to them. It's really essential. More than trees, these neighborhoods need a voice. They need to have some say over their lives. They need not to have things done to them. And so no matter how well-intentioned you are, if you just sort of show up and start doing things that you think of as really good, you will be shocked at the level of hostility and fear and anger that your good intentions can actually sometimes cause. And I don't want the folks who are listening to this call and want to do good things to end up in a situation where they're getting a tremendous amount of bad press, neighbors accusing them of using them as guinea pigs, as happened in Detroit. You really want to, you can't just go in like you would in other neighborhoods where they trust organizations or trust mostly white outside organizations and trust the city. Somebody asked about things you could do to collaborate with underserved. I think that's a great question. Collaborating is exactly the right way to think about it. Employing people within those neighborhoods would show that you recognize the actual needs, which is employment and things like that, and not just you want to do what you want to do. Have the city or other organizations pay for the trees to be planted? I think it's really nice to have other organizations pay for the trees. I think it's actually helpful to involve residents as much as possible. If you can have them do sweat equity in taking care of the tree, if you can give trees to people who are prepared to say they'll do maintenance, then that's actually a really good idea. If you can give people choices, do you want a tree? Here are the species that make sense for this site. Where would you like it? Things like that. Those are choices which make people feel heard and are likely to help address mistrust. I think I had another question up here. How to convince policymakers who want apples to apples comparisons. For example, people in the most green areas spend 14% less on healthcare than people in the least green areas. Equals, it's about $330 per person per year. And it costs only Y dollars per year to plant or maintain tree canopy at the most green level. Then, yeah, right. I think that would be really good to do. And I'm trying to get the numbers out of the Kaiser folks to be able to do that calculation for you, but I haven't had any luck yet. then how long would it take to get meaningful high canopy results? These are not, when we are looking at NDVI and tree canopy in real California neighborhoods in real time, that's by no means all mature canopy. It's whatever's out there. So when I say that high canopy, that a mature tree seems to be better than an immature tree, that doesn't mean the immature tree is useless. So I'm not sure what the actual sort of growth in benefits, what the curve looks like over time. I think that would be kind of a neat thing to study. Who will pay for the initial investment and ongoing maintenance? I think that's another good question. I think, first of all, I think I don't know. I'm just a researcher. I don't know about this stuff. But I would say that I did take a lot of classes in urban planning because I was always interested in how urban environments are shaped. And what I understood from what I studied is that the people who are effective at the city level are people who are, how shall we say, flexible, resourceful, and willing to share credit. So the key is to go out there and find the partnerships, find the opportunities here and there to make things happen. There is no sort of standard procedure that always works best. That's my impression from what I was taught decades ago in urban planning classes. So I don't think there necessarily is a standard answer, that your specific situation will dictate what opportunities are there and what resources. Would healthcare providers, long-term money shifts from healthcare expense to tree expense, but short-term shift seems key. I'm sorry, I'm not entirely following that question. I'm gonna go further down. I want to come back to this question. I had another thing I forgot to say regarding best practices for working with underserved neighborhoods. I do think it's tremendously helpful if you can find somebody who's from that neighborhood or used to be from that neighborhood to sort of serve as an in. It's helpful to work with, to identify local leaders. Maybe that's a church. Maybe that's I don't know. It's just people who, you know, who does everyone listen to here in this neighborhood, and they'll be able to tell you, right? And you can talk to them. So there are kind of gatekeepers, identifying gatekeepers and trying to work with them. Another thing that sounds kind of bizarre is just go at a time that's convenient for them, provide food. If you can provide childcare, if you can get people to meet with you, go have an initial meeting and be prepared to be beaten up for the terrible things that other people have done to this community. And if you are willing to listen and you reflect back on them, what you're hearing, and then you say why you think you're not going to do that or why you're committed to not doing that, that can go a long way to addressing the trust issue. You're welcome. Succinct, statistically significant results regarding academic achievement and green cover we can use. Yes. Let me give you a couple of my favorite studies, and let me give you 3 studies that are published, which one is our Wolf School Gardens. That's a great study. Stanek, I've forgotten their name, something in Stanek and Ernst. That's a really nice study involving doing biology lessons in a nature preserve. Another great study, well, if you don't mind, I really like my study in Frontiers. What is it called? Okay, so let me just tell you a tiny bit about each of those. The wolf is an actual randomized controlled trial in which they randomly assigned, I don't know, was it 50 schools to receive or not receive school gardens? And then they showed that the ones who received school gardens are doing better in terms of learning biology. And furthermore, what they find is that those schools, they find a dose-response relationship, meaning those schools that did more lessons using the school garden also show bigger gains in biology understanding. So that's kind of that's a very nice study. Ernst and Stanek did a nature preserve based biology class, and they compared kids who either had that class or control group from the same school, and what they see is improvements across just a huge host of areas. Behavior, engagement, interest in science, grades, standardized test scores, kind of you name it. I like my Kuo Frontiers Refueling and Flight study because we actually had 2 teachers who gave lessons indoors and outdoors on the same topic every week. They'd flip a coin to see if they were going to go in or out. And then we looked at how engaged their class was during the class after the indoor or outdoor lesson. So what we were trying to address is one of the main concerns teachers have about teaching outdoors. And they're like, oh, I don't want to do it because my kids are just going to be a mess afterwards. They might be happy while they're doing it, but they're going to be bouncing off the walls after we come in. And so we decided that was worth looking at. And what we found is that, in fact, after coming in from an outdoor class, the class attention span is twice as long as it is if they just had an indoor class. So that's why we call it refueling in flight. Even though they've been outdoors for another class and have been, getting tired in the process, when they come in, they are refreshed and more able to pay attention to the next lesson, not less. They're not jumping up, they're not bouncing off the walls. They're actually more attentive and more engaged after the outdoor lesson. All right. I want to say, while I'm on the academic achievement question, I want to say one more thing about COVID. I think for those of you who are urban foresters of some kind, I think you're actually in an important position to help during COVID, because right now, school districts in all kinds of places are to be blunt, freaking out about whether to go back to school and how to do so. And if you can, at this moment, step in with research showing that, in fact, outdoor lessons are helpful, that they improve engagement in students, that they do so even not just in the general population, but also for students with emotional, cognitive, or behavioral disabilities, then you have the potential to kind of be a hero here. So I would really recommend, I'll put together resources for you if people are interested, and I'm hoping that you can. Okay, great. So I think that's one thing urban forestry can really a service you can do for your communities right now. There's also, just to let you know, there's a New York Times that's super helpful. This happened in the last this happened in the 1900 something. that tuberculosis was a tremendous problem in inner city neighborhoods, and with kids getting sick left and right. And one area decided they were going to try doing outdoor classes. And there's these great pictures of little kids kind of all bundled up in, because it's cold in Philadelphia in the winter. They're all bundled up in these huge comforters with heating stones at their feet. And apparently these outdoor classes, they're just in tents or on ferries or in empty buildings with windows wide open. These schools were tremendously successful and had very few cases of tuberculosis. So it's been done before, and it can be very successful. All right, I'm going to move to the next question. It gives us a minute to think about how we can translate that first round of research into conversations with local officials. Does CAFU? Yes. CAUFC and I are going to be working on that next. They correspond to return on investment in real estate, retail sales, and other factors. Yeah, I think the financial case for urban forestry is actually quite strong. And interestingly enough, I'm not sure why, but mostly when we've been making that case, we've been using ecosystem services that are actually not all that expensive. So, what one tree does for stormwater runoff is not a huge amount of money's worth, right? But it's things like retail sales, investment in real estate, and this giant in the room, healthcare expenditures, where, I mean, honestly, a lot of the kind of physical and biological ecosystem services are pennies, pennies compared to tens of thousands of dollars per capita, right? So I think we've changed the scale of our financial argument completely. Last question. Is there data that shows how reduced heat island effect due to planting of trees benefits and supports the argument for coal? Oh yeah, definitely. I don't have it on hand, but the number I've heard is 7% reduction in something energy costs, I think. But yeah, that's another nice argument, particularly as we have climate change happening. So it's now we're now ending our session, so I should shut up and let our organizer have the floor.
Hey, David, could you put up my slide, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for hanging in there with us. As Ming has indicated, we are going to be doing a lot. This is just the start of letting people know what happened with this Northern California study, along with the Kaiser Health and the reflecting on tree canopy. And so we will be culling and trying to put this information into usable bites that will make a difference for you in the work that you do. So feel free to keep adding questions to that list, and we'll try and address them and get them answered for you. I want to also once again thank the Forest Service and CAL FIRE for supporting us as sponsors that allow us to do this kind of work. So we're really indebted and very appreciative for the ongoing love and support from those two organizations. We are going to do a survey shortly, and David, how does that show up? Does it come out separately via email, right? Or will it pop up on their screen now?
Yeah, it'll be both. So they'll have the chance to answer now, or just receive it via email. And there's also the opportunity for CUs in there for any ISA certified personnel. And
affinity groups. So if you have a particular leaning that you might be interested in to continue a unsupervised partnership with others to have these conversations, we'll be able to put those together. So take a moment to add your name and your topic of interest if indeed you would like to continue. So the greatest thanks to Ming and all of her research partners for the amazing work that they do and how they're helping our industry and public health and so many others to address changes that need to be made. This is the beginning of the work that we'll be doing with Ming. So stand by and we will keep letting you know when we have something new to share. Did I cover everything? I think so. Thank you, Ming. You're tremendous. We really, really appreciate your time.